Hello and welcome to Juliet and Lucy's Quiet Leadership Revolution, the podcast for senior and aspiring leaders who want to make their voice heard and their impact felt through thoughtful, reflective, confident leadership. I'm Juliet Corbett. I'm an executive coach and strategist, and I work one-to-one with senior leaders, guiding them to find their strategic focus, empower their teams, and regain control over their time.
And I'm Lucy Gower. I'm a facilitator, trainer and coach, and I empower leaders to build their happy, confident and high-performing teams. Today we're going to talk about storytelling and why it is such a powerful communication tool for leaders. I know that my background is working a lot with the not-for-profit sector, and I first realised that stories were really important when I was raising funds for a charitable organisation. And when I first started to tell stories about the difference that people could make and the impact they could make, all of a sudden my conversations got better and I raised more money. Later on, when I worked within innovation, I also tapped into storytelling, because telling the story of the different future if people got involved with the new idea, process, system, cut through and got buy-in way more quickly than ever using data and spreadsheets. So I started to really investigate why this was. And I think some of the things we'll talk about today, Juliet, is kind of that why piece for storytelling. But tell me about your storytelling thoughts.
Yeah, so interestingly, so my first jobs were around fundraising as well, and definitely I was doing a lot of storytelling in that and was more effective when I was storytelling. Interestingly, I've never felt naturally confident as a storyteller, and it's only in the last maybe 5 years ago, or maybe nice 5 to 10 years, that I felt much more confident in this area, in this skill set. It's interesting, Lucy, you told me that I've always been a good storyteller because it's innate. We're going to come to that in a moment. But my confidence has ebbed and flowed over this particular topic. And certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, I felt very comfortable, very confident in using storytelling. But I've come to that through a more circuitous route, perhaps, than you have. And I think the most important lesson that I've learned is that while you and I both discovered it through fundraising, and obviously marketing being the wider kind of version of that, it's absolutely essential for leaders in any area, even if you're doing operations management or HR, or you're in the finance team or something where naturally you maybe haven't had storytelling training, no one really talks about storytelling. It's still really important for you as well. And I think in this episode we want to work out our rationale, our narrative, if you like, for why storytelling matters for all leaders. It's leadership.
Absolutely. And I think that if you work with other people, if you lead, whether that's leading yourself or leading a team or an organization, the ability to bring people along with you as change happens, as you want to inspire people, the storytelling skills that are innate, I'll come back to that, are really absolutely key. And I think the thing that I see a lot, your story of dips in confidence around storytelling is really normal. And I think what I see happening is that as human beings, we are innate storytellers. Storytelling is another one of those survival skills that are that's kind of left over. The story of which fruits are safe to eat and which are not, where you're allowed to go in the forest, where it is safe. All of that is fundamentally about survival. And so left over from that, our ears prick up. We're always looking for stories. We interpret the world through story. And I think that what happens then when we go to work and we get a professional job and we feel that it's maybe childish or it's not quite the right thing to do to tell stories, and we get like what I call the corporate slide deck, which is like, this organization was established in this time to do X, Y, and Z, which is great, really, really valid. I'm not dissing the corporate slide deck. But in switching from our innate storytelling style of communication to a more corporate style, something gets lost. And I think that our confidence can take a little bit of a wobble, because there's a tension between what I feel I want to do as a human and what I'm being asked to do because I've got my professional persona
Yeah.
face on.
And there's echoes there around learning that you can use emotion in different ways or show emotion in different ways that can be very powerful as a leader, and that you don't have to hide that, that you can
Yeah.
express your individuality through, the suits that you're wearing. You still may need to follow a certain dress code of what's required given your organization and the culture that you work in, but you can always benefit by showing your individual. Like the journey here, which I think I have taken to become much more myself in a leadership role, which actually echoes the journey that I took specifically around storytelling. And actually, as you say that, just one little point in case anyone else is thinking about it to begin with. The other reason I think that I found it difficult was because sometimes when we talk about storytelling or creating a narrative is another
Mm-hmm.
word that people use around this. I sometimes feel the necessity to say based on truth. I'm not telling tales in the way that I tell my, 8-year-old son off for doing. This isn't about storytelling to kind of hide the truth or to be dishonest in some way. And I think realizing that actually this is about presenting the facts, the truth in a way which lands with people was also part of the journey that I found. This
Yeah.
is not about telling tales and storytelling and narratives that are false in some way to
Yeah.
hide things.
Yeah, this isn't about making up stories. This is about using story or narrative, whatever words you want to use, in order to communicate more effectively with a wide range of different audiences, whether that is your teammates, the people that you manage, or it might be your customers, your clients, people in other departments and functions. It connects us, and as human beings we're social animals, and without sounding too kind of like highfalutin about it, it's like stories are the glue that connects us as human beings, and we mustn't
Yeah,
lose that. um, and I understand that kind of confidence, like as we're learning and growing, there's always you get that kind of unconscious competence.
yes.
And I think as you start to think about storytelling, that can happen. It just shows that you're on a journey of learning.
Yeah. And that learning journey often causes you to question your innate abilities
Yeah.
before then re-establishing some technique, perhaps on top of
Yeah.
those innate abilities. And that a dip in confidence is often
Yeah.
involved in that process.
Yeah. And I guess you have a choice. You can look at it as I am learning something here. So my confidence has taken a bit of a dip because I've realized that there's things that I don't know. And
Yeah.
that's can be a positive or a
Yeah.
negative. But I'm
Yeah.
in this case, I'm looking at it as a positive, that you're not you personally, but one is on to learning something.
Yes, exactly. So we're actually going to talk in our next episode about some of the steps to telling a good story. So
Mm-hmm.
if that's the question that you're listening to this and you've got in your mind, then wait for the next episode because we're going to be covering that in a lot of detail. But Lucy, you teased us there, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about the importance of storytelling for relationships because that feels like that's at the absolute center of what we're doing here. So what is it
Yeah.
around storytelling that helps us to create those really strong relationships?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I train teams in storytelling for building relationships, for working better together, for working with clients, for working with customers. And I do have a little bit of a list. So I
Go
think
for it.
there's something, like I already said, that we are wired to see the world through story. And I think stories connect us rationally and emotionally. We feel empathy when, if you've ever heard a story and you felt some sort of emotion, and I don't mean, oh, feeling sad, like any sort of emotion, um, that is around empathy and connection. And the evidence shows that as human beings, we are make our decisions first emotionally and then we back it up with rationale. So if you can tell a story where somebody feels something, then they're more likely to take action or do something than hearing something rational. So I often use the example of I've got a pair of beautiful red shoes. Oh my gosh, they're lovely. And I saw them in a shop window because I saw them and I fell in love with them and I had to buy them. So I've fallen in love with them. I've made my decision. It was an emotional decision. And then I backed it up with rationale about how often I would wear them. I tried them on. They're all right, comfortable, but not brilliant. But I'd already made my decision. And so the story that I told myself about wearing these shoes was the decision-making part. And then I backed it up with how much they would cost and if I wore them for 3 years non-stop, like that was okay. my that story analogy, like we make decisions like that. We have an emotional decision back up with rationale. People buy houses based on how it feels when they walk in the house. Perhaps one of the biggest decisions that you'll ever make. And so understanding that, and the story is almost like your shortcut to somebody being emotionally responsive to something as well as rationally responsive. Sometimes people say, oh, doesn't that feel manipulative? And I think that could be the case, but it's very much in the integrity of the storyteller. You shouldn't be telling stories to manipulate people to feel something. You tell stories for people to feel some emotional connection to the bigger picture that you're talking about.
Yeah. And that's possibly comes back to that idea earlier around the importance of truth. And I think
Yes.
any leadership technique that you learn, any leadership skill that you learn can be used for good or for ill. And so having the values and the ethics that you need to have in place to make sure that you're not manipulating people through using emotion is really important to have in place. And it may be that if you are feeling that this isn't an area that you feel confident in, it may be that just reassuring yourself or your team that you have those values and ethical framework in place could be something that can help you to harness the storytelling and the narratives.
Great. And I think the fundamental principle that people respond to story and see where you can weave story into things. So for example, if you're leading a team and there's some, you're getting a new CRM system and you need people to buy into that, you might tell the story of somebody else who's done it and the challenges that they went through, but what the better future looks like, for example. Or you might share, depending on what your team needs, how you're feeling about it. I'm feeling a bit apprehensive about how this is going to work. So what can we all do to work together to get to that different future?
Yeah, so absolutely. So using the emotion in an ethical way to weave the story is really important. I think that sometimes giving some leadership examples around this could be really useful as well. So thinking about when you're leading a team through change, the importance of giving stories which demonstrate that people have been through, like we have been through things like this in the past as a team, or teams that I have been involved with in the past went through this, and this is how it felt, and this was the end result, and this is why the work that we put in now is worthwhile because of the future benefits, the future vision, the painting of how it's going to look going forwards, for example.
Exactly. And in that story, you're also giving people permission to know that it's okay that they might feel a bit apprehensive about a change, or they might feel a bit uncertain, or they might feel a bit threatened, whatever that is. By you sharing some of your feelings, thoughts, and narratives, you're giving other people the permission to do that, because people will feel that whether you tell the story or not. And if they're feeling it and there isn't a avenue for them to express it, that is a bad thing. If you are giving them permission to have those open conversations, then that is a very powerful gift to be able to give to them as a leader.
Yeah. I think the other time is as well in crisis management. So that's a period of change which might have gone wrong and might be publicly having scrutiny around it. And the importance of being able to use story in that scenario, thinking about demonstrating the values that are core to the organization, being able to give past examples about the ways in which those have been core to the organization, either through history or through previous impact that the organization has had. And then being able to tell a story around how the actions that you're proposing to take to overcome the crisis, reputational crisis, for example, is going to be sufficient to deliver a new set of values which are going to embed or be enhanced in the way that the organization goes forward. So being able to think about how you can use the storytelling techniques and these opportunities to harness that connection, the relationships, the emotion in a way that's going to actually make a difference to you as a leader, I think is really, really important as well.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the time with the leaders that I work with, they actually do really good storytelling, but haven't labeled it as that. So, if you're
Yes.
telling any sort of narrative or analogy about this is the future that we're looking to go to, this is how it's happened before, these are my own experiences, your storytelling, it doesn't have to
Yeah.
start once upon a time there was a
Yeah.
evil shoemaker or whatever. Like those anecdotes, if you are using narrative, not data,
Yeah.
you've got a story. Yes, you can tell stories through data too, but actually it's the connection, the human connection
Yeah.
part that's the key that I want to get across here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so thinking about that, the benefit of storytelling as you're creating relationships with people is around the fact they're so memorable. They
Yes.
stick in your
Yeah.
mind and you might forget all the facts and the details of the story, and then you try and retell it and you realize that actually you can't remember, you can't remember all the detail. But actually stories are really memorable. I guess that's connected to the evolutionary
Yeah.
biology that you mentioned earlier, but
Yeah.
tapping into that fact that it gives something which is easily recalled,
Yeah.
potentially at a moment of stress, potentially at a moment many, many years into the future, is another really key
Yeah.
element of storytelling, isn't
Yeah.
it?
There is a stack of research about how we remember stories for longer and how stories are really shareable. So, back, like you say, back to survival, and no wonder we can really remember stories, and they get shared. Like, I know that um I did textile design as my degree many years ago now, and we had to do a science module as part of it. And our science teacher was was a brilliant, brilliant storyteller, because he had a group of us who had wanted to come and do drawing and making things with our hands, who were utterly devastated to have to do a science module. And he taught us through story, in that if we were making synthetic materials, whether we were at a party holding hands or whether we were a party at a crisscross formation. Now, if anyone's got a science background, that's going to sound extremely pedestrian, but I'm telling this story because he, as a tutor, knew his audience really well. He knew what success looked like, which was to get us through our exams. And he was able to put all of his wealth of knowledge to one side in order to tell the story that was going to best help us. And I think that is really key, like making complex things simple is one of the things that storytelling, if you do it well, does a
Yeah.
really good job of.
And that's actually one of the most powerful ways that I link strategy to storytelling. So once we've created, if I'm working with a client to create a strategy, I often say that the process which we go through may well feel complicated and have a messy middle, and it'll feel quite difficult at times. But the end strategy that needs to be communicated to key stakeholders, especially staff, if they're the ones that are going to be involved in really delivering it, that needs to have absolute clarity. And one of the best ways to create that clarity is what's the story that we could tell around what we're going to achieve in year 1, year 3, year 5. Like, what is the big picture vision of how the future will look different? And actually thinking about that as storytelling rather than strategy, it unlocks a completely different way of people thinking about it. And normally what you get is something much simpler, has much greater clarity, and therefore is much more memorable
Yeah.
for people who are hearing it.
Yeah. And shareable for people to
Correct.
talk about
Yes.
within the organization, and perhaps less scope for misunderstanding if you've got a very simple narrative and story.
Yeah.
And I suppose on that piece around strategy, like for me, in my mind, strategy is all about the impact that you're making, and the story can tell the impact again in a very clear way. Strategies are not, can be really complex, but actually the impact that they are intended
Yeah.
to have should be really simple.
And compelling, and
Yeah.
that people really care about, because we're
Yeah.
going to make a lot of effort
Yeah.
to shift strategic direction in some way, even if it's lots of small changes. Enormous amount of effort goes in. Why people should bother is because of that impact that you're seeking
And if
to
you're
have.
telling a story that has an emotional connection to it, connecting to that impact and why it's important that we are all pulling together in the same direction to deliver on this strategy, is where storytelling kind of comes to
Yeah,
the fore again.
yeah, absolutely. It's also amazing for painting futures, isn't it? I mean,
Mm.
storytelling, I think when we think about story, we naturally think about history and future. Or maybe that's just me, I don't know, but
Yeah.
we kind of hark back to historical fairy tales. We think about stories around what the future could be like, and that we can paint a completely different picture of what that future could be like through a story. And being able to play with the narrative and how that impact is also future focused. We're painting a future kind of image of what we think the world will be like if we achieve this tough goal or this hard work that we're going to put in now. That's incredibly motivating when it comes to creating a narrative that gets people acting in a consistent way towards a strategy.
And I think it takes us out of the day to day. So I know in previous episodes we've talked about divergent thinking and convergent thinking. It helps to take us out of the day to day. And a wonderful word for storytelling is imagine. Imagine what it would be like if. Imagine the different future. What is the future that we want to imagine and create together? Takes people away from their to-do lists and helps them to think creatively and tap into something quite, again, emotional. Imagining that future is so powerful, and if you're imagining it, you can be part of it, and people want to be part of making some sort of change happen within
Yeah,
their organization. And if they
yeah.
don't feel that, that's can be challenging as a leader.
Yeah, so that divergent thinking stage around problem solving for innovation workshops, thinking about strategy, anytime you're bringing your team together to try and solve a problem in a different way, that imagining is it's harnessing, isn't it, the possibilities around storytelling
Yeah.
to get people to think about
Yeah,
what could be different.
it can give a different lens on a problem or a situation, and it can help bring people together to talk about their different perspectives.
Mm,
And I know that depending on what sort of workshop I'm delivering, sometimes I might ask people to draw what the future looks like, or to talk about it from a perspective of a customer or a client, and it just helps to shift the perspective and thinking. And you can play with storytelling. You can play and see what works well for you as an individual, and
yeah,
what works well for your team, the different individuals within your team.
yeah. Definitely that kind of different perspectives, different lenses that you get is really important.
Yeah.
The other thing you triggered a thought just a few moments ago. You used the word analogy,
Mm.
and actually, I often would put this in a slightly different category to storytelling. But analogy feels like it's like a little micro story
Yeah.
that tells a story within a couple of sentences that can be really impactful. What are your thoughts? Does that
Yeah.
counts as storytelling, actually, doesn't it? Now I think about it.
I would say it counts as storytelling, because an analogy is a way of communicating with people, and it is a way of making things simple, making things shareable. So earlier when we were talking about analogy, Juliet, you said, so an analogy is part of my communication toolbox, and rather than trying to use a lot of like blunt drill bits, it is the sharp drill bit that can get to the point straight away. And I was like, yes, that is exactly it. So your
Yeah,
toolbox analogy just cuts through a lot of conversation and makes it really clear to
yeah.
me and others. So yeah, I use analogies a lot, and I encourage others to do it too.
Yeah, that's actually been one of my projects over the last couple of years has been to try and use more analogy because I'm seeing the impact it can have. And that idea that storytelling is one of the sharpened and ready to go drill bits sitting in your case, and then opting to leave it in the case and pick out all of these slightly blunt drill bits around the importance of using a spreadsheet and macros and all sorts of things I don't understand in order to tell, why you should be, influencing up to create a decision that you want to happen. Like, why would you not reach for your sharpest drill
Exactly.
bit in the toolbox, which is your storytelling skill, and weave that into the report that you're using when you're trying to influence up, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And actually, sometimes if you start to notice, if you use analogies, when people get it, they kind of light up, and the toolbox analogy can
Yeah.
run and run. You almost give
Yeah.
people a slightly different language to use, which again is
Yeah.
about connection and about clarity, and can be enjoyable to have that conversation.
It does. It creates some play and some fun into what could otherwise be quite a serious
Yeah,
conversation. The thing that came to mind there actually is I often use analogy within coaching sessions. And what's
yeah,
really interesting is it crops up later. And not every time, but quite often, an analogy that I or a client have used early in the conversation, we can come back to kind of 3 or 4
yeah,
times
yeah,
as being, oh, yeah, that's, we're talking about something different. Oh, yeah, that's another drill bit I've got, that I
yeah,
should
yeah,
be using more. They'll come back and then it creates, it's memorable. It
yeah,
enables them to be doing divergent thinking because they're slightly more in a playful mindset of what else is possible. What
yeah,
other drill bits might you have that you can
yeah,
use? What other tools? Maybe it's not the drill at all. Maybe it's a
yeah,
different tool.
yeah,
It unlocks another way of thinking, those
yeah,
lenses that we talked about.
yeah,
It creates some levity. So there's an element of play.
yeah,
And actually, it's really amazing sometimes that the insight, often in a coaching session, there's 1 or 2 moments where it's like, oh, yes, that's the insight. That's the moment at which the world shifts for
yeah,
them as the client who's having that conversation. It's amazing how many times it emerges from analogy.
yeah,
I'm going to reframe those as little micro stories
yeah,
from now on. I'm going to see how that shifts things in my mind as
yeah,
to whether that's, yeah, micro storytelling almost.
yeah. Micro stories. I love
Mm,
that.
interesting. So, were there any other things that we haven't, or other ways that leaders use stories that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, I want to talk about how people share their own personal stories. So when I run storytelling training, one of the things that I often do is get people within the group to share their own personal backstory, um, for several reasons. It's a great conversation opener. It's great for helping people to understand each other's perspectives and where they've come from, their values, their behaviours, their skills and experience. And all of a sudden, the room changes. Once I was working with a leadership team from a homeless organisation who were working really well, but there was something that just wasn't quite gelling. And we did some storytelling, and it turns out that 2/3 of the room had a lived experience of homelessness, but no one else knew about it. And all of a sudden, everyone was on the same page of like, oh, this is why we're here. And that happens again and again and again and again. So I really recommend that if you don't know the backstory of your colleagues and your teammates, that you do some kind of random coffee. Some organizations I work with do like a
Mm.
random coffee exercise where you, over the course of months and perhaps as part of induction, you meet other people and you don't go, here's what I do, here's my job, here's my spreadsheets. You go, wow, when I was younger, I wanted to do this, and then I did this, and you learn about people's skills and experience and the whole person, and something intangible shifts between those relationships. So, sometimes I do storytelling training with sales teams. Sometimes it's about leading change. Often it's about forming really good relationships in high performing teams. And that is I don't want to over egg it, but it's an unbelievable starting point of the insights that people get, and that the penny drop moments where people are like, oh, so that's why you know about this, or that's why you see that in that particular way.
Yeah.
Just shortcuts, months and months of meetings where people don't talk properly about what makes them tick.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's because it's like relationship gold dust, basically. It
Yes,
shortcuts all of those lengthy know, like, and trust
yes,
conversations, and it speeds them up so that you can know, like, and trust someone within 5 minutes, basically.
yes,
And let's be honest, it won't always mean that that person becomes a best friend.
no,
That's okay, but like, and trust them because you can see the world from their perspective, and you
exactly.
can see the value that perspective brings to the conversation.
And they get to see the world from your perspective too.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
So, as we wrap up this first of these 2 episodes, thinking this time about why storytelling is important, and next time how to do the storytelling kind
Mm.
of step by step kind of process for you. Lucy, how do you help people with storytelling?
I run training for teams to help them connect. I run training for teams working with a whole range of different audiences to help them connect. So sales training, fundraising training. So get in touch, Lucy at lucidity.org.uk, if you'd like to talk about what your team might need to help them connect and tell better stories. What about you, Juliet?
Fantastic.
You said that you
Yeah.
earlier, it made me laugh because you said, I'm not sure about storytelling and I've really worked at it. And then you've talked so much about how you help your clients with storytelling. So
Yeah, it is definitely one of those skills where the confidence has ebbed and flowed, but it
yeah,
has been very much in kind of in the flow state for the last
yeah,
5, 10 years, I guess. Yeah, so I help one-to-one kind of conversations with senior leaders that are helping them to understand their own story sometimes. So understanding how their career narrative kind of came together and how it makes sense now to then tell that career narrative to other people, and then how those leaders can use story to create empowered teams and strategies that really speak to stakeholders and get actions and behaviors changing. So if you're interested in some executive coaching around that, then you can contact me at juliet@consultjuliet.co.uk. So Lucy, I think we're wrapping up this conversation. Any final thoughts for people around this one?
I think the thing that I want you to take away is that you're already a brilliant storyteller. You might not have labeled it as that. And the more you can weave stories and narrative and open up some of your personal experience to your leadership style, you will engage and inspire others and it will help you on your leadership journey. What about you, Julia? Any final comments?
Yeah, I think believing that it's an innate skill that you were born with, and knowing that if your confidence ebbs and flows on this, that's okay. Listen to next week's episode for a bit more how-to information,
Yeah.
but knowing that you can use story and that innate skill in any part of your leadership can be really empowering. So I encourage you to think about where you can use story more. So thank you everyone for spending your time with us. Don't forget that if you want to make your voice heard and your impact felt, you need to give yourself the space to think, the courage to lead, and the confidence to adapt. I'm Juliet Corbett, an executive coach and strategist working one-to-one with senior leaders.
And I'm Lucy Gower, a facilitator, trainer, and coach, helping leaders develop high performing teams. Join us next time for the Quiet Leadership Revolution.